Now that you have mastered adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers that you learned in Basic Skills Reviews number 1, 2, and 3, we're going to do Basic Skills Review number 4. This time we're going to be adding or multiplying more than 2 integers. Let's start with adding more than 2 integers. When adding more than 2 integers, follow your rules for adding integers. So go back to Basic Skills Review number 1 if you need to review those rules. If all of the integers are positive, the sum will be positive. If all of the integers are negative, the sum will be negative. If some of the integers are positive and some of the integers are negative, the sum will depend on whether you have more positives or more negatives. So let's look at the rules, or the example, sorry. 2 plus 3 plus 5 equals 10. When I add 2 plus 3, I get 5. 5 plus 5 equals 10. All positive integers, positive sum. This time we have all negative integers, and we have a negative sum. Negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus negative 5 is negative 10. The next example, we have 2 plus negative 3 plus 5. The best way to do this is to put all of your positives and all of your negatives together. 2 plus 5, your positives, plus negative 3. 2 plus 5 is 7, so we have 7 here, plus negative 3. Now you're going to use your addition rules that say we're adding different signs. When we add different signs, we subtract, and we give it the sign of the one we have the most of. We had more 7s, so more positives. 7 minus 3 is 4, so your answer is positive 4 because you had more positives. Let's take a look at the guided practice questions. Down at the bottom we have 15 plus 12 plus 10. The best way to do it is to add 2 of them, so 15 plus 12 is 27, plus 10, 27 plus 10 is 37. They were all positive, so our answer is positive. On number 2, all of them are negative, so our answer is going to be negative. Negative 15 plus negative 12 is negative 27, plus negative 10 is negative 37. If you take these one step at a time, they will be easier and you'll make fewer mistakes. Number 3, this time we have a positive and we have 2 negatives. So we're going to leave our positive here and we're going to add our 2 negatives. Remember from your addition rules, if you add 2 negatives, you get a negative. Negative 12 plus negative 10 is negative 22. Now I'm going to use my rules for adding integers with different signs. I cannot add these two together because they're different. I know that I have more negatives. Because I have more negatives, my answer will be negative, but I have to subtract. 22 minus 15 equals 7, so my answer is negative 7. Let's look at number 4. 15 plus negative 12 plus 10. Let's put our positives and negatives together. We'll go ahead and add our 2 positives. 15 plus 10 is 25, plus negative 12. This time I have more positives, so my answer will be positive, but I need to subtract because I'm adding different signs. So 25 minus 12 equals 13. My answer is positive, so positive 13. Number 5. 5 plus negative 6 plus 8 plus negative 2. Let's write our positives and negatives together. We'll go ahead and add our 2 positives. 5 plus 8 is 13. We'll add our 2 negatives. Negative 6 plus negative 2 is negative 8. And now we have to use our rule for adding different signs. I have more positives, so my answer is going to be positive, but I have to subtract. 13 minus 8 is 5, so my answer is positive 5. Number 6, we'll put our negatives and positives together. Negative 7 plus negative 9 plus negative 12 plus 5 plus 4. My positives are easy to add. I have 9. My negatives may take 2 steps. Unless you want to add them in your head, you know that you have 3 negatives, so your answer will be negative. Negative 7 plus negative 9 is negative 16 plus negative 12 plus 9. Negative 16 plus negative 12 is negative 28 plus 9. Now I'm adding different signs. So I have 28 negatives and 9 positives, so I know my answer will be negative. I subtract the 2, 28 minus 9 equals 19, so my answer is negative 19. Down at the bottom, 7 and 8 are a little bit more difficult because they've added subtraction in. If we use our subtraction rule, it'll make these a lot easier. So we have negative 7. We're going to change our subtraction to addition, change our 20 to negative 20. So same, opposite, opposite, plus 8. We'll add our 2 negatives. Negative 7 plus 20 is negative 27 plus 8. Now I'm adding different signs. I have more negatives, so I know my answer is going to be negative, but I have to subtract. So 27 minus 8 equals 19. My answer is negative 19. On number 8, negative 19 plus 4 minus 12. So let's use our subtraction rule. Negative 19 plus 4. 4 stays the same. Subtraction becomes addition. 12 becomes negative 12. Let's group our negatives and positives together. So negative 19 plus negative 12 plus 4. We'll add our 2 negatives together. Negative 19 plus negative 12 is negative 31 plus 4. Now I'm adding different signs. When I add different signs, I'm going to look to see what I have more of. I have more negatives, so my answer is negative. 31 minus 4 equals 27, so my answer is negative 27. This is one of those skills that you need to take your time on. I would highly suggest that you go back now, listen to the video from guided practice. That means starting back up here with number 1 and 2. Now that you've written them down, go back up, listen to what I'm saying, and follow along. Instead of writing, listen. I think it'll make a big difference on how you do these problems. Once you're finished, come back and we'll take a look at the multiplying more than 2 integers. Okay, now that you've had some time to review adding more than 2 integers, let's multiply more than 2 integers. When multiplying more than 2 integers, follow your rules for multiplying integers. If all of the integers are positive, the product will be positive. If there are an even number of negatives, the product will be positive. If there are an odd number of negatives, the product will be negative. We've talked about this before. We've said that anytime you have a negative or an odd number of negatives, your answer will be negative. So let's take a look. All are positive, answer is positive. 2 times 3 times 5 is 30. 2 times 3 is 6 times 5 is 30. On this one we have 3 negatives. That's an odd number of negatives because we have 3 of them. So our answer is going to be negative. Negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. The next example is negative 2 times 3 times negative 5. This time I have an even number of negatives. I have an even number, I have 2. So I know that my answer is going to be positive. Negative 2 times positive 3 is negative 6. Negative 6 times negative 5 is positive 30. On the next one, I have an odd number of negatives. I have 1. So I know my answer will be negative. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 6 times 5 is negative 30. Let's take a look at the guided practice. 5 times 4 times 2. All positive, so our answer will be positive. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 times 2 is 40. Number 2. When I look at it, I know that I have an odd number of negatives, so my answer will be negative. Negative 5 times negative 4 is positive 20. When I multiply two negatives, I get a positive. Times negative 2. 20 times negative 2, I multiply a positive times a negative, I get negative 40. So my answer is negative 40. Number 3. 5 times negative 4 times negative 2. I have an even number of negatives. There are two negatives, so my answer will be positive. I'm going to go ahead and multiply my negatives together first. Negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. 5 times 8 is positive 40. You could have multiplied 5 times negative 4 first and gotten negative 20, and negative 20 times negative 2 is still positive 40. Doesn't matter what order you multiply them in, if you do it correctly, you should get the same answer. Number 4, we have an odd number of negatives. We have one negative, so I know my answer will be negative. I'm going to multiply my positives together first, and I get 8. And then I multiply 8 by negative 5, and I get negative 40. Number 5. Number 5, I have four numbers to multiply together. Of those four numbers, two of them are negative. That's an even number of negatives, so I know my answer will be positive. I'm going to go ahead and multiply 2 times negative 4, and I get negative 8, times 3 times negative 3, and I get negative 9. And then when I multiply two negatives together, I know I get a positive. Negative 8 times negative 9 is 72. So my answer is 72. For number 6, I have 1, 2, 3 negatives. That's an odd number of negatives, so I know my answer will be negative. Negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. And 8 times negative 9 is negative 72. Once you know your basic rules for multiplying and adding integers, adding and multiplying more than two integers will become a lot easier. So if you are confused with this, I suggest that you go back to lessons 1 and 3 and review your addition and your multiplication rules, and then come back and once again listen to the guided practice as you follow along rather than writing. Once you're finished, you've got a homework number 4 where you're going to be finding the sum or the product depending on whether it's addition or multiplication. Pay attention to which problem is which. Like, for example, number 1 is addition, and when you get down to number 7, 8, 9, and 10, you're talking about multiplication. Okay? Notice that numbers 5 and 6 have subtraction in them. You may want to go back and review the two problems at the end of adding more than two integers that include subtraction. When you're finished with this assignment and you have passed it to my satisfaction, then you may move on to Basic Skills Review number 5.